Just the questions that Colin sent through.
When we last spoke, I think your average time to close a case was about 148 days. I notice your webpage indicates 44% of cases are closed within 3 months or less. Do we have an average figure?
I don't think we do. I think we've got a breakdown by by time. Happy to get you an average figure on notice.
Well, that's fine. No, take that on notice. How are you measuring performance? I mean, from your webpage, they look like good numbers, but I'm reflecting as a lawyer in another context. Are you happy with the turnover of the cases, or you think there's room for improvement? I appreciate how long a piece of string.
No. It's
complexity of the investigation. So I'm just I'm asking from a high-level perspective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the frustration that I have, and I'll get the Deputy Inspector General to elaborate, and potentially my assistant for regulatory, Tara, who's behind us. So you want to join us? She may have a more detailed question. She's in charge of the audit investigation team. The frustrations we have as an office is that we can investigate something, but the law, we can't find non-compliance because the legislation's poor and/or there's no consequence. So we can do 1,000 investigations and they can be this long in length or this long, depends on the piece of string argument, but ultimately if there's no consequences or there's something we can't pursue further, they're always going to be shorter and potentially some may be longer.
Yes.
It distorts it, so it's difficult to give you a...
I appreciate that. I'm really feeling, because you're a fairly new entity, what you're thinking is at the moment, and obviously that will evolve.
Yeah.
Yep. Just to add to that, so we have 3 tools in the kit, if you like. So investigations is one of those main 3 that we have, but we've also got audits and inquiries. So we tend to look at the problem first, and then we look at what's the right tool. So sometimes a problem will come in, it might look like an investigation, or you do an investigation first. It might not lead to an enforcement action, but it might lead to our understanding of something that we then audit or something that we then inquire into.
Yes.
So certainly there's a pathway there. In terms of are we happy with that, I'd also reflect on probably a change in attitude at the macro level that we're seeing. So enforcement is part of the story, but I would say there's been a really clear shift in our 3 years about how people respond to us now. Right. And what we find when we get there and start talking to people. So information's a lot more readily available, people respond quicker, we're getting access to things, and people are working with us to provide us the information so that we can work through the issue. And a lot of these are very complicated. There's a lot of aspects to the things that we tend to investigate. So some of our work is shifting, and it means more audits or more inquiries. And the review of the Inspector General looked at that issue as well, and it essentially said a lot of the work that we do is probably aligned heavily to the audit and inquiries tool, and the investigation tool is really more about trade non-compliances and enforcement of trade rules, where there's really clear responsibility in a rule and there's a consequence associated with that. So it's a balancing act for us about where we put our resources and what we focus on.
I appreciate the answer. It's an evolution of how we measure efficiency of your organisation. So I'll continue to ask that, but I thought I'd mark a moment in time.
Do you like how we've put the stuff on our website? And stuff?
I do. I used to sit on an oversight committee of an ICAC in a state parliament, and it was a similar debate about how to measure efficiency.
Yeah, is that working? Do we need to do it any better or differently?
No, it's the same difficulty.
Okay.
Maybe they have more powers of compulsion and less can make themselves more efficient. Yeah. In some of my readings, whilst we're on this topic, and some academic analysis, and I can give you the references to the papers, and I'm not intending to put the propositions in the papers to you, otherwise I would have tabled them and given you some notice. But there's a concept of estimating the real penalty value of water theft. I'm not sure whether you turn your mind to that. and it involves sufficient penalties, sufficient data and sufficient auditing generally, which is many of the themes of your papers. Are we going to get to a place where we sort of measure, or as legislators are we not doing enough to give the penalties, or is that a state issue?
That's a great
which
question.
lever should we as legislators be looking at the moment?
It's a great question, and have we turned our mind to it? Absolutely. Even from when I was the interim, it was one of the number one complaints from the Basin community. So we explored through the Pearson report about the penalties and found there was very little we could do because each jurisdiction have their own penalty regimes and they're all linked and all that sort of stuff. But we've also started to work on another body of work to put a value to the environmental harm as an option for penalty and sentencing, etc., to be considered, which my General Counsel is working with the jurisdictions over. But Daniel, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll probably just start with noting the increase in penalties in New South Wales, and that's really an action which reflects the underlying proposition of your question. So New South Wales have just increased the maximum penalties for serious water theft, for example. So individual, it was set at $750 in terms of that penalty infringement notice that could be issued by the Natural Resources Access Regulator. That's now up to $7,500 for an individual, so a tenfold increase. For corporations, it's up from $1,500 to $15,400. Similar for unauthorised works, which are up from $750 to $3,000 for an individual and $1,500 to $6,000 for a corporation. And there's also similar offences for metering and licence breaches. So they're all increasing. And when you look at the underlying rationale for the New South Wales Government's decision there with NRA, that's all about addressing is this an effective deterrent? Is it significant enough when you look at the economics of breaking the law to deter people from doing so? So that's a really positive step in terms of New South Wales addressing that issue. But we're coming at this from a broader perspective. So the compliance performance report that the Inspector General referenced earlier, where what we've done in the first version of that is get all of the activity metrics together. So how many audits are you doing, how many investigations, what does it lead to, penalties, enforcement actions, all of those activities. But the broader picture where we're heading is being able to put outcome measures to that, so we can see inputs, activities, outputs, short-term outcomes, long-term outcomes. So we'll get the first report of the activity stuff out within a couple of weeks. And then beyond that, we're heading into that outcomes territory, so we can get an effective measure about not only seeing how many things have been done, but is it working, is it shifting the dial in terms of effectiveness.
Yeah,
And just in the right style, I referenced the environmental harm component of it. That's also going to be like project number 3 of the Regulatory Leaders Forum, so they're all leaning into that from their perspective.
Yeah,
and we would take that through to BOC and others after that's completed.
I was very interested. There's some excellent work being done at Flinders University by Sarah Wheeler on
We've read, and there's a number of them at the moment. There's 2 or 3 that are out recently and we're aware of and thinking about the same issues.
Whilst we're talking about New South Wales, in August we had some public comment about your difficulties with New South Wales with the water resource plans. Can we just have an update on where you're at with that?
I can, but that's a question that the MDBA own.
Yeah, but they
I spoke to...
From your perspective.
So, yeah, sorry. I spoke to Minister Plibersek personally the 29th of October for an update and regular contact. So they've got a commitment to submit the final 4, 2 surface water, 2 groundwater by December, and they're working towards that. They've got some engagement with the Gomeroi people, I think, to finalise that sort of process. But
Minister Jackson, rather than Plibersek.
Jackson, sorry.
My question was coming from
Davey Jackson Plibersek today. I'm having a shocker. Sorry.
No,
Minister Jackson in New South Wales.
I was just coming from the perspective that was frustrating you,
yes,
your ability to do your job. So
yes,
we're still in
the frustration remains.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just touching on the media point raised by the chair and my fellow senators. There's also academic work around the role of the media and the frustrations in community holding different views, and I appreciate your great work in trying to get some clarity of thought and rational debate about the plan. Are you thinking about measuring your media impacts?
We do.
Because, and at some point be able to assist us with, there's your spend, and you think that you're getting that amount. I know it's difficult to measure. I had to do that in a previous life, but there are ways.
Yeah, so we've got our Water's Edge podcast.
Yes.
And we do results on how that. We're from, I think they're under the category of government podcasts or something like that. And we're like Taylor Swift. We're like on top of the charts.
Right.
So we're going really good there. Instagram's very new. We're using that because it's a type of forum to have pictures with purpose. So we use that as great graphics to then direct people into other areas with better information. And LinkedIn.
I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah, but so we are in the process of measuring all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, could you take it on notice to give some KPIs? I don't need them today, but I'd just like to make it as part of the ongoing discourse about how much market penetration you're getting with your messages. It's simply in that context.
Happy to take it on notice to provide that. To give you a really quick example, Henty Field Days, we do spend and we use a cost per mil, otherwise known as cost per thousand, and we calculate that. So a cost to reach 1,000 people, or cost per person across 1,000 people is 30 cents, for example, for us in that space.
Yeah, I was coming from not just the return on investment, but also market penetration because of your work. One last question. I don't want to reach into hypotheticals and annoy the minister, but if there is some discussion in the media about certain areas, particularly in my own state, being declared critically endangered. Now, if or when something is declared critically endangered, does that impact your work or trigger any considerations by your office under your statutory obligations? You can take that on notice. It was just a thought.
I think we'll take that on notice, but I'm not aware of a specific trigger, but there might be implicit triggers within specific rules. So
it may be on the nature of the declaration, any conditions on that declaration, but I was interested from a technical perspective rather than a...
We'll find out and get back to you with an answer.
That's all the questions I have.
Thank you.